As certified life coaches with 45 years combined experience in human resources, Jen Trumm and Katherine have both experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, both personally and professionally. What they both know to be true is this: our mental, physical, and emotional health are the essential building blocks in order to thrive and shine in the field of HR. In a first of its kind podcast, we'll be getting real and we'll discuss and share what has contributed to both our success and struggles, with the goal of inspiring women around the globe to stand tall and take the necessary action to both thrive and shine in HR. Here are your hosts, Jen and Katherine. Such a fun intro as always. It always makes me so excited to listen to that music and the intro as we're diving in to another episode of Thrive and Shine HR. Jen, episode 27. How are you feeling about episode 27?
27, man. Feels like just yesterday we were so giddy on starting on episode 1, but here we are, 27.
27. Yeah. And for our listeners, it hasn't been necessarily every single week. That was the goal we set out with, but then life happens, right? So we have flexed as we've needed to. And here we are sitting down, doing another recording for all of you, our listeners. And we're going to talk about something today that I hear over and over and over again is a thing in HR. We're going to talk about taking things personally. And the technical title of episode 27 is Stop Taking Things So Personally in HR. So, Jen, before we dive in, I've got to know what you are looking forward to in the next couple of days. What is on the horizon that you're like, oh yeah, I get to do that?
I'm excited about seeing my son. So I have a son who lives about 4.5 hours away north, and he's coming down this weekend to be around family. We're going to do some outdoor things, hopefully. Now that I'm able to put some weight on my foot, I'm able to walk around a little bit. So we talked about do some zip lining. So yeah, I'm excited. This will be a weekend where I'll get to see some family and get to see my boys, get my boys back together. So it'll be a great weekend. I've been looking forward to it and kind of chomping at the bit all week long to be able to get the gang back together this weekend. So yeah, that's what I'm kind of itching.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
How about you? What do you got going forward? What are you looking forward to?
Kind of the same, although mine's a little bit further out. I have an older sister My older sister has a lake home in Tennessee. So after I speak at the Trumm conference next week, I'm actually going to take a few days off. I'm going to celebrate Labor Day weekend with my sister at her home that I have never been to. I have never been to her lake house. So I'm really, really excited to spend some time with her, my brother-in-law, my niece, and maybe even my nephew who just started his first year at Purdue University as a freshman. So I'm hopeful. I don't know if I'll see him, but very much family related. Same thing. Just love family, love blood.
Love it.
Love it. Well, I can't wait to hear how your weekend goes with your boys. That's so exciting.
Yeah, family is, so special. And as we know, it could also be so complicated. So it's like when we're actually in moments where, we are connected and we can really, enjoy and look forward to these moments. Those are the best, because it doesn't always work out that way.
Doesn't always work out that way. Gosh, I go back to, I'm already getting sidetracked, but I go back to, I'm sure many of our listeners have heard this, Jen. I'm sure you've heard this too, that, once you go to college or leave the house at 18, the amount of time we get to spend with our parents, in your case, get to spend with your kiddos, it's like the smallest number of hours or days, it's really the holidays because people tend to move on. And if they don't move back into the home, it's like you have, I don't know, 20 more Christmases together or something like that. I don't know. There's some numbers out there, and maybe that's a negative thing to focus on, but I do think about that with my parents. And how many more holidays do I have with them? Do I get to spend with them? So the older I get, the more I prioritize that time that I get to have with my parents. And if I just laser focus on that, and Jen, as you know, just letting all of my other family drama not drop away, but if I just focus on, I want to be with my parents and spend quality time with my parents, helps me out tremendously. Helps me to, I don't know, laser in on what's the important thing while I still have them in my life, right? I don't
Yeah,
know.
and we can be intentional about those that we do have in our lives, regardless of what might have slipped away, like those are the things,
Mm.
reality of, yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole.
Already have.
But
Already
it's so precious then to then, latch into and really, treasure those that we, love to be around.
I just love your language. Like, I just salivate when you say the things that you do. You're like a linguist. Okay, well, I want you to keep going with that linguistical genius. And I want to hear from you what you know about why humans do take things personally. Like what the research says, what you've learned over the course of your career. What do you know to be true about humans taking things personally? Why do we freaking do it?
So I went in a little bit on the research on this one because
Yeah.
I really wanted to go to the core. Like, we could look at it from like a workplace and this and that, but there was a study that was done. It was about 12 years ago in a review called psychological review. So it's one of those
Okay.
peer-reviewed, studies. And so
Yeah.
what it was it talked about the comparison between social pain and physical pain from a neuroscience perspective, right? And the
Preach.
similarities of our
You
and
know
the
I geek out on this. I
similarities,
can't wait.
yeah, and the similarities of social pain, rejection, abandonment, embarrassment being just as triggering to our bodily senses as skinning a knee, breaking a bone, whatever. I mean, the comparisons,
Whoa.
were staggering. And ever since then, that was one of the biggest studies that's come out, and it's been about 12 years ago. And think about it. Think about like how we still are not talking about this, like free flowing, talking about this, about like how
Mhm.
much our emotional pain and social pain creates physical pain. So when you think about taking things personally, the idea of taking things personally is to have some sense of feeling rejected, lack of belonging, lack of inclusion, discomfort. And all of those things, regardless of the why behind it, all of those things are potential triggers to pain, to suffering. And you and I both know that when we are in a place of suffering, we're not able to think logically, we're not able to think rationally, we're not able to slow ourselves down enough to recognize we're in fight, flight, or freeze. Right. And so the whole idea of taking things personally is really that inability, at no fault of our own necessarily, because we're acting from a programmed, level of reaction to triggers that are painful, being rejected,
Mm.
being excluded, all of those things are painful. So
Mm.
we're going to get into into the deeper parts of this, of like, what do you do about it? Right. The pain is going to be there. That reaction is going to be there. Now what? But that's a whole nother part of it. But this particular study, I was like, yes, that's it. That's like the nugget that kind of it all comes out from. And it's
Yeah.
really about social rejection, social hurt, is painful. So
Isn't
that's
that
what I came up
interesting?
with, Catherine. I cannot wait to hear what you've come up with on this one. So what have you found science-wise and research-wise? Why in the world do we take things personally?
I did a lot of research into this as well because I find the topic so fascinating. I do have a history of taking things very personally, and I really, really wanted to understand it.
Mhm.
And I am not going to be able to quote my source, so forgive me on that. I'm not going to be able to do it. My first answer, what I found, and I was kind of surprised, but not surprised. 3 words. That's two, in case you're watching the video of this. 3 words: negative self-talk.
Mm. Mhm.
We actually don't take things personally unless we actually think there's some truth to it, right? So if we lack that negative self talk, then we're not going to be taking it personally. So it really comes down to self doubt. And the other research that I really honed in on was our identity is really tied to our ego. And our ego exists for one thing, and it's to justify our existence. And Jen, I think this is where our research really comes into play and sort of starts intertwining. Our ego stands for fear and for judgment and for guilt. And what was the terminology you were using? I don't know if you said abandonment, but that's what's coming up for me.
I said
So
abandonment, rejection,
abandonment
failure.
and
Yeah.
rejection.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the research I found, so something tells me we're talking about the same thing, very interwoven. It's about the ego. It's about that those feelings of judgment, that social part of it, about being part of being a human,
Mhm.
and having that negative self-talk. Oh, the joy of negative self-talk, said no one ever. No one. No one. Oh my God, so interesting.
So
So
true, though. I mean,
so
just to
interesting.
kind of jump on that a little bit, I
Yeah.
mean, they are, what we're talking is so similar because, with these triggers that are going to happen if, someone is excluded or, rejected or
Mhm.
whatever. And then it is about like how we respond to that and how we then take that on and like you said, that the negative self-talk that comes from it. And from
Yeah.
there, we're now down a rabbit hole. We're in like this vortex of completely
Yes.
unable to really rationalize the situation and take a step out of it. So yeah, that's so good, Catherine. I mean, good stuff.
Well, what you just shared leads me right into question number 2, just this vortex and this suck almost. When you think about us, you and I, our listeners, anyone who's an HR professional, do you I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think HR professionals tend to take things personally? And if so, why?
Hmm.
You have a tendency to do that, to take things really personally in HR. I'm curious what your experience has been like as you have conversations with HR professionals. Do you see a pattern there?
I don't know that I would say that HR takes things more personally than
Okay.
other people. I don't
Yeah.
know that I would say that, but I will say that because of the role that HR is in and kind of
Mhm.
the outsiders, right, on the outside of the glass looking in, there's something about the role itself. There's something about the role itself that has this exclusionary piece to it
Oh.
that's what I think is really tricky and is almost like a slippery slope that I've seen over and over again. And I know you have too, and working with HR people, that's a hard one. Like if you don't have some pretty tough shell, and I know you and I've talked about like kind of the tough shell we walked around in, and that can be a real blessing, right? Being the tough cookie, but it also means like we're kind of impenetrable. And there's a point of
Mm.
that like is like can be a risk. And at the same time, the reason behind the tough shell, the reason why, that ends up happening is because of this natural consequence of the role itself. So that's kind of my theory, is it's not so much like we're like too much. Like HR, they're just too much. They just take everything personally. I don't know if I go there. I think just on average, we're probably pretty close. But at the same time, there's two things about HR. One, we're gonna talk, especially with one another. So we tend to be pretty lippy when it comes to like talking about this stuff collectively together. And then two, I think our roles are just we're the outsiders. And I think it's perfectly okay to celebrate that and just own it. And that's part of, I think, the challenge for a lot of people in HR is like that acceptance, that true, like being okay with that being the reality and not feeling like that's a problem, like there's something wrong with that. Because I think that ends up serving into taking all kinds of other things personally if we're not okay and grounded within our roles just as they are. So I kind of went all over the place, but I really, on that one, I'm like, yeah, yes, and
Yeah.
like, yes, and I think this is a symptom to a bigger thing of the role itself. And that is, part of the, just is what it is about the role. And we've talked about it on the podcast before, but yet it does lead itself to some of these other like neuroses.
Yes.
that
Yeah.
come with us in HR because of this unique dynamic within the role. So that's my answer. How about you? Where do you see HR in the role of taking things personally?
I don't know if I can say anything right now because I am pontificating and just absolutely swirling in such a good way with your response. This is where I'm not a linguist like Jen is at all. I mean, I don't even know if pontificate was the right word to say right
That's
there.
a great word.
Really? I have to look it up. My learning disability, I just threw that out there. I was like, I think this makes sense in this context, but maybe not.
It sounds good to me.
Okay, great. We're going to go with it. I'm going to get a name tag for the Tennessee Sherm Conference that says Katherine Fry Speaker Pontificator. Okay, we're just going to do that. Okay. Jen, geez. Okay. The reason I'm so blown away by what you just shared is I just had this conversation in HR Empower Hour yesterday. I asked the members of HR Empower Hour, I was like, I know what I love about HR Empower Hour. So we get together every single Tuesday, like clockwork, 2:00 Eastern time, talk about a hot HR topic, right? And the women said, and I may start crying, all women currently enrolled as members. And the women said, I look forward to Tuesday. I look forward to seeing everyone. It was this sense of belonging. It's the antidote to loneliness. It's this safe, judgment-free zone that I very intentionally created because I just know as an HR practitioner, I felt so lonely. And I tended to work in smaller organizations, oftentimes a department of one. And I also think you're absolutely right. That it's this isolation. And not only I almost picture this glass and we're looking out, trying to be observers, and it's obviously glass. It's two ways, and we're constantly under the microscope as well.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yes. I mean, we are.
We are.
It's not like people are looking at the finance team or the IT team saying, what are you doing? Are you doing it right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a different type of lens, right? There's finance, things and that sort of thing, but the lens is different from like,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, it feels more personal in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because I mean, I originally approached HR in this very black and white way, which we talked about in this podcast. And now I approach it a little bit more with gray areas. So I do feel a little more scrutinized. It's like, I am not just following policy. I follow the intent of the policy. Speaking of intention, right? And I do think individuals are very different. So the way I approach our HR now is a little bit different than I have in the past. So maybe that's sort of why, at least I can only speak for myself, that it feels personal if someone's like, yeah, that shit ain't right. You know what I'm saying? Just, and maybe because I'm making a judgment call. I don't know. I'm speaking only for myself right now.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like in HR, I don't think there's any other role where character really does matter. And I think it's a unique role in that way, and one that it's interesting then how kind of the judgments kind of flow, because ultimately we need to be able to stand on our own ground in terms of like knowing who we are and our character. But yet, because part of our what we do is character based, that's going to be another episode. I'm going to pause it on that.
I mean,
Think about that, right?
I need to write that one down. Yeah. So layered.
Yeah.
Character based. And then I link it back to, I still can't get over those burnout statistics from a year and a half ago that Trumm put out. It's like 86% of our professions burned out. And I also feel that in and of itself, like we're in that state of overwhelm where we're really stressed. We just put our heads down. We can't be proactive. We're just in this reactive stance. And I feel as though, and I know there's neuroscience behind this, but you know, when you're swirling, and that we talk about swirling so much, swirling in our self-induced shitstorm on this podcast, you know, I think when we're swirling and when we're in a state of burnout, we are sometimes just so far down the drain. It's hard for us to see our own way out. And therefore, I don't know. It's almost like there's this flood coming down the drain. I'm having really strange visuals today, but I picture like myself way down in the drain and just this water coming in. And it just, I don't know, it just gets to be super personal, because sometimes we're like the only person in that drain, you know? And it's like, well, of course this is personal. How could this not be personal? I've got all this work coming on me. I can't figure it out. That's a personal problem. I don't know. Seeing it through my own lens of my own shitstorm, obviously. I don't know if you can relate to that at all, but there you go.
100% I can. And actually, I'll say, I mean, what I think is so common is like when somebody is like in that place where they're down the drain or where they're just feeling completely flooded, it truly, with a full tank of like empathy and compassion, it is so impossible and difficult to be able to take a step back and recognize kind of our emotional, you know, there's so much about it that's just really difficult to do. That's like you and I've talked about before, where we've gone through different phases, where we've gone through like depressed phases. And science has shown that so often you don't really see and recognize what you were in, the shitstorm, so to speak. You really don't see it clearly until after you've had a chance to come out of it sometimes. So it just depends.
So true.
Everybody is different, and how we experience things is different. And so I think, you know, one of the things that I love about this podcast and I love about HR and Power Hour is like bringing that awareness, right? How it's going to actually manifest and how we're going to kind of figure this stuff out and move through it. It's going to vary for everybody. But the more that we can bring this stuff and find ways to become more aware of it and just be able to call it out, we're not judging it. We're just, you know, we're just being aware of it. I think there's so much power in that. And I think that, you know, just makes it, helps to build more of like some foundation around this stuff. Whereas before, everyone's just like, especially think COVID and you know, before that even, it's just, we don't talk about it. And even when we do talk about it, it's a shit show, because it's just, you know, it ends up building to the point where it finally blows up and we're not regulated when we, you know, address these things. So I think it's progress. And progress, you know, in this way, when we're trying to figure out how to get out of the storm, sometimes is going to be a little bit messy. And that's definitely, I think, where we tend to find ourselves in this place, you know?
Totally. And for some of us, over and over again for about 30 years, just over.
Same, without a doubt.
Well, I am curious if there's one instance that really stands out in your past when you practice the skill of reflection, looking back over your career. Is there a time where you took something really personally? That's just a standout example for you.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'd been a manager probably for 5, 6 years, so I was still pretty green around, my leadership prowess.
Yes.
And I had an employee who I was really struggling with. They were having a lot of attendance issues. They were late. They were, when they were inconsistent, and they ended up disclosing that they were struggling with some mental health stuff. So we were really trying to accommodate them, going above and beyond, in some
Yeah.
ways to really work with this individual who kind of tended to be up and down. And so it got to a point where I started to lose my patience a little bit. And we ended up having a conversation between she and I where she didn't like how it went, and I didn't either, to be honest. I got to a point where I finally lost some patience because she
Sure.
missed a deliverable, and it just was more, it kind of got to a different side of Jen, right? Where it was like, okay, we need to talk about this. And she ended up reporting it to my boss, right? So she went to my boss and basically said that I was bullying her, that I was being insensitive to her mental health issues. So my boss ended up mediating a conversation between she and I, and it went fine. It went fine as
Yeah.
far as conversations went, where my manager kind of had to come in and be involved. But I
Yeah.
will never forget, like, I was pretty quiet during the conversation. I wasn't, argumentative, but my face and my body language and my demeanor, I think, said it all without a doubt. I think I was
Wow.
red in the face. I think I was like gripping onto my chair. I was like, how could they? Right? It felt so personal. I felt so disrespected. I felt so wronged in that situation that they wouldn't have come to me first based on the circumstances of the situation. And it's, a longer deep dive story, but basically, they made that choice rather than to try to address me or talk it through a little bit. They had made a misunderstanding about part of the situation. So my take at that time was completely 100% taking it personal, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
really paying attention to really the heart of the concern from the employee. I
Mm.
wasn't really fully paying attention to really just like coming out of from a place of like curiosity and trying to really just be open to the situation. And rather, it was fully ego. It was fully like
Yeah.
not being able to like be present. And that's what I remember most about that situation is like, I could have been right and I could have been wrong. But the problem I really had with myself and how I showed up in that situation is I allowed my own emotional state to keep me from being able to regulate myself to a
Mm.
place where I could truly be able to show up as my best. And
Yeah.
I'll just never forget that. And I have moments, always, it happens not all the time, but it happens. And I look back on that, often because, when it comes to taking things personally and then letting that sideline me for no ability to be able to control myself at that point,
Mm.
then, that really, I think, helped me kind of see that that's not the person I want to be, regardless of if I felt like they were, acting childish or disrespectful or whatever. It didn't, it didn't work for me. So that's my story. How about you? What kind of example do you have or that you can recall where you did take things a little personally?
I mean, Jen, I feel like I say this every week. I have so many examples. It's really hard to pick. And the example you just shared, I have a very similar story. So I won't share that example. It happened pretty early on in my career where my boss had to mediate between me and our HR new hire. And I started thinking, as you're sharing, I'm obviously not engaged in active listening because my mind is starting to spin, right? I'm listening, but I'm not active listening. I'm not deep listening. Full disclosure. If anyone knows the difference, if you don't, I'm happy to explain it at some other time. Whole other episode. As I'm sitting here, I have so much shame around it. If I'm being really, I have so much shame as I'm reflecting back on a similar story or a similar example that I went through at work. And I think that's really interesting that I'm experiencing some shame right now, that it felt so personal and how I showed up in that situation. And anyway, I got to shake off that shame.
And I will say too, I mean, even as I'm telling the story and it happened like 12 years ago,
Yeah.
I still feel that shame because I know, deep in my heart that there was a better version of me that could have showed up that day. That don't feel good, right? That don't feel good. But at the same time, it's what a gift that we're given when, and you and I've talked about this in terms of drinking and all of that. What a gift that we're given that we can now reflect back and know exactly the type of person that we never want to be again. So that's where I truly, truly believe that's the purpose of shame. If we allow it to have its place and we can own it for what it's there to serve us and give us,
amazing.
and we can let it go.
Yeah.
And so that's my offering to anyone out there who has other examples that they come up with too, where it brings up that shame. It's like, good. If it's there, let it be there, let it teach you, and then get it the fuck out.
Get it the fuck out. Yeah. We have a lot of fun phrases on this podcast with our listeners. Get it the fuck out is another really good one that we can see. I know. Don't be sorry. I'm serious. And I just said that today. I was doing an hour-long training called Fix the Fix Mindset. If anyone's familiar with Carol Dweck's work, my whole workshop was based on that premise.
Nice.
And yeah, it was really cool. And one of the managers in the audience, I can't even remember the context, but I was like, as a coach, as a manager, as a supervisor, let your employees get that shit. You have to get that shit the fuck out of your body. You have to provide a safe psychological space for people to get it out and then go into the problem solving. Don't dive right into the problem solving. Let them get it out. Anyway, total sidetrack. But yeah, I mean, I love what you just said about shame. And I just haven't thought about that situation in so long. And I'm really surprised by the amount of shame I'm feeling right now. So yeah, I'll dive in deep with my new therapist on that one. That's pretty. But I mean, the example that I've been thinking of when it comes to when I've taken something personally at work is when we did an employee survey on all departments, and I was a department of one, and a lot of positive accolades, but human brain naturally goes, we have negativity bias. So a lot of us naturally go to what's the criticism, right? There can be 100 things that are said that are so great about us, but we'll narrow in on that criticism. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of HR is not approachable. Mm. And when I heard that, I was like, the thoughts that came up for me, they have no idea what it's like to be a department of one. They have no idea how busy I am. They have no idea I'm working nights and weekends, all the things. Mm-hmm. But in hindsight, it was absolutely true. I wasn't approachable. I was not in a headspace to be approachable. So I think with time, like you're saying, sometimes we look back on it and it was like, oh my gosh, there was a huge lesson learned in there. Mm-hmm. And that made me start thinking about Brooke Castillo. She started the Life Coach School. She is the most famous life coach out there in the world. And well, maybe not. That's just my opinion. She talks about when somebody has a criticism of her, she immediately goes to, yeah, that's probably true. And it catches people off guard. So instead of like seeing it as a negative thing, relating it to our negative self-talk, what if we channeled our inner Brooke Castillo, or at least tried it on and just said, yeah, it's probably true. Okay, I'm a human. It's probably true. And I think another layer of this that we haven't talked about is that we have high expectations of ourselves in human resources, that we are, or people or culture, or whatever you want to call it, that we need to be setting the example of how employees should be behaving in the workplace. And we put so much pressure on ourselves that when we don't meet those standards, it feels personal if somebody calls us in on it. I don't want to say calls us out, but they see it and they acknowledge it and they talk to us about it, let's just say, and then we take it personally. I don't know. It's sort of that, how can we remove that negative self-talk that's so intertwined with taking things personally? I don't know. Kind of interesting. My brain's going hog wild over here today.
That's good questions. And I think important, for all of us to be considering. So yeah.
Well, so my example obviously went to like this employee survey. It felt like almost like a 180, but Jen, knowing that performance management, falls under the bucket of HR's responsibility, whether it's a 180, whether it's an annual performance review, whether it's quarterly check-ins, whatever that is, it's sort of interesting because that right there is an opportunity to sort of welcome feedback, right? So when we receive that feedback, do you think we should almost know when to take things personally in that situation and when we shouldn't take things personally? Is there even such a thing? In other words, I guess I'm not being very articulate. My question is, when it comes to performance management, how do we know when we should take something personally and when we shouldn't?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I think,
I love that.
No, I mean, it's a toughie, right? Because like, even though, Brooke Castillo, who is amazing, like that's a high bar to be able to kind of get to a point where you're like, bring it. I'm sure it's true. That's fine. Right. And like to be able to kind of have that sense of, clarity about who you are and what you do and what what you have to give. And it's like, okay. And, and the reality is that we have a lot of fragile people out there, and there's a lot of fragility around constructive feedback and feedback in general. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I think the core of that and the why behind, that fragility comes down to safety. Right? Do people feel truly safe to be able to give and receive feedback in a way that's productive and healthy and that sort of thing? But really, I think in terms of performance and feedback and reviews and that sort of thing, whether or not it's personal or not personal, I think, there's always going to be a sense of a personal component to it. It can't not have that when we're being truly objective, right? But I think the reality of how we can best be as objective as possible is through space and distance. And so one of the things that I offer up for, anyone who is struggling with, performance reviews or feedback process is to never put themselves in a position where they feel like they have to respond right away. They have to react right away. Anything like that. Give space to the ability to absorb, to be curious, to be, as clear as you possibly can with a little bit of emotional distance. Because again, going back to like the beginning part, that is a natural response for humans to have pain type triggers in our body if we're getting feedback or if we're, hearing information about ourselves that is going to cause us to feel rejected, feel abandoned, feel excluded, feel isolated, feel not good enough, all of those things. And so if we're then continuing to force ourselves like a round peg in a square hole to continue to be a part of a conversation or say, what do you think about that? Like with a microphone. And so like, what do you feel about that? That's a risk. That's a risk that I think for me, as I've grown in my maturity, emotional maturity, I have to be really careful for myself if I'm going to then push myself to actually verbally communicate when I'm in a place where I'm feeling attacked or however my brain is deciding, choosing whatever stories have been made up.
Oh boy.
I think that there's a real opportunity for anybody out there to recognize the power in the pause, the power in that spacing that we can give ourselves that can give us that ability to be more clear-minded about how we want to respond and react and what we might want to take personally, not take personally, what do we want to discard and toss and and get to that place where we can be like Brooke and it's like, okay, that's fine. But I think the reality is most of us we don't have that in us yet. I think that's taken a lot of practice, a lot of time.
Oh my God, yes.
And I think it's possible within every one of us to get to a point where we're like, sure, fine, that's cool. But I think until that time, what tools can we give ourselves? What can we do within ourselves that's going to allow for that space so then we can be really conscious about what it is that we feel as though needs to be, needs more attention versus what doesn't. So I kind of went off on a little bit of a ride there, but I think
so related and so poignant. You were spot on. Go ahead. I cut you off.
No. I was wrapping up. So yeah, I think, I just think that we need to be able to give ourselves, we need to empower ourselves a little bit when it comes to this type of stuff because and obviously, being in HR roles that we're in, I think many of us can feel as though there's this pressure where we need to respond right away. There needs to be a reaction. There needs to be a response. And I would challenge that more. I would challenge all of us more to say, hey, you know what? I think we actually could have a huge amount of power by learning how to give a little bit more space. And that in of itself might be something that could help lead on to others within the organization. So, okay, now I'm done. What about you? Like where for you do you think that, it could, really, how within the performance management system can we differentiate between what is and what's not personal?
I have 3 nuggets. The first is a dovetail off of what you just shared that I hadn't thought of until you just started talking about the power of the pause. And when I'm thinking about the title of episode 27, this episode, it literally starts with the word stop. Stop taking things so personally in HR. Do you know what I'm about to say with the word stop, what that acronym means? Have you heard this?
I think I have. I think, yes.
Yeah. So my very first therapy session, I was in my 30s because when I started in HR, mental health wasn't talked about. I started in HR in the 90s. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't a thing. And if you went to therapy, there was something really wrong with you. Like there was such a stigma around therapy. And now today in the office, we were just openly talking about our new therapist. It is just a thing, right?
I was today too.
Right? It's totally acceptable. And it's almost like a badge of honor. It's like, I care enough about myself and you and how I show up in this organization to go to therapy and work on myself. I think it's pretty cool. But my very first therapist used the acronym STOP. So it's stop. Like when you receive that feedback, stop, take a breath, consider your options. The O is options, and then P is proceed. That's my recollection of it.
I heard O is observe. So you
observe. Okay.
Yeah. How funny. So stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed is how I've heard it before.
I love that. It's the same message, I think. A very, very similar message, brother and sister message. So I love that. I love what you just shared. And it's just so fun. I was like, oh, I didn't even put this together. Use that acronym. I completely agree. And I think a way to do it is just, hey, thank you so much for that feedback. I want to take a little bit of time to digest, right? Just go in preparing to listen during that conversation. And you don't have to take all that on. So this is my second point. I think of a colander, not that I'm a cook, so I hope I'm referencing the right, it's not a utensil, but kitchen thing. I mean, I'm thinking of like spaghetti going into the colander, right? Is that what that's called? The colander? Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking. So this is how much of a chef I am, right? So let's say you just made spaghetti, you're draining the spaghetti, you put it in the colander, the water is coming out, but the spaghetti is obviously hanging in there. And I believe that we get to do the same thing when it comes to performance reviews. We get to let the things just go that we know maybe it's just not the right time to work on it, or it just doesn't resonate. We're like, that doesn't feel true to me, because going back to those feelings in our body, I do think we know when we hear something and it's like, not in the Brooke Castillo way, but it's true. Like, I just feel our bodies, at least my body tells me, yeah, that's totally true. And whether it's a full-on blind spot or a partial blind spot, or the Jorhart model, the unconscious, the conscious, all those types of things, I just believe in our bodies. We know, at least I do. Maybe that makes me an empath on myself. I have no idea. Still have to look into empath. But I think we just get to choose. Thank you so much for that feedback. What do I want to focus on? What do I want to make that mean? And is it useful? Is it healthy? And how can we pivot it toward more of an asset-based thought? So if we get the feedback, like I did, of you're not approachable, instead of saying, I don't want to be unapproachable, and focusing on what we don't want to be. I don't want to be. I want to be approachable. And focusing on that, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have that swirl, at least for me. If I stop focusing on, oh my God, I'm unapproachable, I've got to stop being unapproachable. If I just focus on, I want to be an approachable human resources professional. And for me, that means being calm, not overloading myself like I tend to do and just have so much work. I just do that to myself. So for me, that's, I don't know, really, really good feedback. And just a little bit of it, kind of dipping into techniques a little bit, but I don't know. That's what I got.
I love it.
I mean, speaking of techniques, do you have approaches that work for you to stop taking things so personally?
I had stop on here.
You did not. Are you kidding me?
You can't see. Okay, for anyone who was just saw that,
you
but
cannot make that up.
No, literally stop. 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 Take a breath. Observe. Proceed. Yes, that's my answer. Final answer.
Stop it. Were you like UMF? You just stole my answer.
No, not at all. As soon as you were saying that, I'm like, well, I'll get to that next question. But
oh my God, you are hilarious. For those of you who are new to our podcast, you will notice that this happens with me and Jen. Throughout, it is just this interwoven pattern where we come up with a lot of the same things, and we don't practice this before we hit record. So I think that's very synergistic.
Yeah. And then there was another acronym.
Okay.
So there's STOP, and then there's GLAP. So
never heard it.
GLAP is something by my coach, Derek Grant. And GLAP is gratitude, love, acceptance, and peace. So while I'm in STOP, right? So if I'm in a place where I need to take a step back because of critical feedback, constructive feedback, or whatever, GLAP is what I need to practice. What am I grateful for? Okay. Where do I feel the love? What do I need to accept? Right? Where am I struggling with acceptance or with ownership? Because like you said, there is going to be some truth in so much. And so sometimes it's just about like really allowing and accepting. And then peace. What do I need to kind of be at peace about this? Why is it that I'm holding on, or what am I resisting to from being able to feel peace? So stop, GLAP. is my final answer. And I think within both of those, when it comes to really being able to get to a place where I can be okay with whatever it is that is coming towards me in terms of feedback. We have to, yeah, that security within oneself, I think, is so important.
Mm.
And so you don't find that, you don't get that while we're still trying to be in it. And that's why, stopping and slowing down and pausing is by far the most important thing that we can do for ourselves. And it's the least oh, there goes my voice. It's the least
Sure.
intuitive that I think for so many of us that we think of, right? It's not intuitive to
It's
slow
not
down.
for me.
Yeah.
Hell no, it's not intuitive for me.
Yeah. So it takes practice. And so anyway, that's mine. Glap and stop. How about you,
Okay,
Katherine?
I have a related question. When you say it's not intuitive for you to stop and glap,
Mm-hmm.
when I think of it's not intuitive for me at all. And I know my primary fight or flight response is fight. I want to talk things out. And I like to just kind of almost overshare what I'm thinking. And for me, that's why stop was so helpful and continues to be helpful in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a dominant fight or flight pattern? I'm just curious if you also fight and therefore that's why stop is so critical for you. Cuz and I'm probably overthinking, but I would imagine if somebody has the freeze pattern or the fawn pattern or the flight pattern,
Mm-hmm.
that they are more likely to have that stop mechanism already built in. I could be making things up. I mean, this is truly looking through my lens of I want to talk about it. I want to resolve it. I wanted to resolve it yesterday. The minute I know something's wrong, I want to figure it out. As opposed, like that is why stop was one of the greatest tips and techniques I was ever given. What do
Yeah,
you
I think
what's
um
true for you?
s- I, I kind of am somebody who definitely has struggled with, being similar to you, wanting to get it out, wanting to talk it through, wanting to just move on. And I think what's really interesting is regardless of our way of addressing the discomfort, whether it's going
Mhm.
to be pushing it out and talking it through, whether it's bottling it up and, doing whatever behaviors and drinking and whatever to kind of hide away from it, whether it's just running away, all of those things ultimately may or may not address like the core and the root of it. Because
Yeah.
one of the things that, I heard is like, even if my
Ooh.
natural tendency is to fight and to push, it's not always necessarily really getting to the core of the trigger. It instead sometimes is just our way of kind of plowing through. Right. And that goes the same with avoidance
Mm.
behaviors and different things. It's really just letting it pass, and then we'll move on. So yeah, I think that, the stop piece, there's two parts of it. It's like, okay, you can stop and you can really pay attention for this one particular issue and circumstantially, what is needed in order to address this. And then there's two, when you're going kind of to the deeper coaching stuff, right? It's like, what's
Yeah.
really going on here? What's underneath the hood in what's happening? And that is where I think it's useful across the board. Like, unless, the individual in question, which, I'm not there yet, but unless they are a Brooke Castillo, they got their shit together and nothing this is it's going to roll right off them, then I think we all have our different behaviors, whether they are attacking and aggressive or
Mm.
retreating and avoidant. But I think both of them can be equally challenging when it comes to
Love
really
that.
getting at the core of what might be going on.
Yeah. I just said I love that, but I don't love that. I love your insightfulness.
Like, that's great. That's
That
just great.
that's great. That's great. What a great no. Yeah. Um, so here's here's what's helpful for me. This is a little zany, but it's fun. I also think it's fun. So Jen, if I were to say to you, Jen, your blue hair, you need to rethink it. It's not professional. You shouldn't have blue hair in the office. What would you say back to me?
I just heard something this morning that I loved. So there was the Jay Shetty, his morning meditation through Calm.
Yeah.
And this morning he was talking about, do you know who Sarah Blakely is, the CEO of Spanx?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he was talking about it actually is this morning's on Calm
You
about
can't make this stuff up.
about a criticism, about constructive criticism. And what he was saying that she does, he's like, it's so amazing because anytime anyone has any constructive feedback or criticism, she will respond immediately and say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I will take this under advisement and I will get back to you. And she does. And she gets back to whoever it is and says, I did take it under consideration and I really like my blue hair. Thank you very much for your feedback. But it's so methodical without emotion. It's not, not seeing feedback as triggering in any way. It's being able to accept it, digest it, absorb it, and then be able to respond to it. It was like when I heard that this morning, I'm like, hot damn, if that's not the way that I am working towards. And I believe I
Love
am,
that.
to a point where that sort of thing, just like you were saying with Brooke earlier, you can accept it. You can, hear it. You can really appreciate it. I can say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That does not resonate with me, but I do appreciate you sharing that with me. So it's like, there's so many different ways to say it, but I think it all is going to start and end with like how grounded and how secure we feel with ourselves. And the more that we feel grounded and secure with ourselves, then we can react from a place of respect. We can react from a place of kindness. It's not personal, but that's it. That's it right there. Are we to that place where then it's coming across contrived because now I'm trying to kind of fake it and put something just out there. And I don't think, many of us, it's a lot easier said than done. And, it takes that practice of getting to the point where you can, be able to parse it out.
Yeah.
And then that whole going back to the person, that's gold, man. I think that is just badass to be able to say, okay, you'd given me this feedback. I want to let you know, and just really feeling as though that feedback matters. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be able to receive feedback and give feedback. And so that's something that so rarely happens, where we'll actually kind of go back around, to people sometimes. And so there could be great gifts with that. So
I love that. Yeah. I mean, that's something I've never done. I've never thought of. Well, maybe I have, maybe I just haven't thought about that, to go back and say, thank you, and that initial thank you, I'll take that under advisement. I love that.
Yeah,
And then to actually go back. That's really cool. That's
yeah.
really cool. Do you have any other nuggets for our listeners as we come to the close of episode 27? I mean, is there any other bit of advice that you have for our listeners out there about?
I'll get on my soapbox on
Let's hear it.
on meditation. And
Oh,
it's like when it comes to short-term addressing of the issues that come up day to day, we can talk about stop and we can talk about glap and we can talk about these different things that we can do to address the day-to-day stuff that comes out. But what I truly believe is it's the long-term benefits that I've gained from meditation and mindfulness practices that have been such a game changer around like my ability overall just to not be as reactive as I used to be. And I do believe that a big part of that has to do with just learning how to be more aware of my nervous system. It's like, it's so simple. It seems so simple. And yet it takes that type of practice to get to a point where I was like, I'm okay with these different rises and falls because it's a part of the experience, but it's taken time to get there. So what about you? What little nugget, what can you offer as we're wrapping up today, Katherine?
well, I often say, and I mentioned this on social media last night, that I am very grateful when I quote unquote get triggered, because I know when I'm triggered, I'm like, there it is. I'm so glad to know that's the work I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that same vein, when I feel it in my body that I am starting to take something personally, that gratitude, there it is. I'm taking it personally. What's actually going on here? And me knowing that the root is negative self talk. Boom, I'm going to get right to it. And I'm going to get curious with myself and really almost practice the 5 whys, like really get down to the root of why in the world am I taking this personally? That's so interesting. I'm so glad that person said something to me and I am responding in this way. My body's doing this thing because it just means that I've got some work to do on my negative self-talk.
Yeah.
So that's my personal, like, thank you. Very
Yeah.
similar to what you're, in terms of meditation and gratitude. It's like, thank you. Got some work to do here. I don't know.
I love that though. I mean, I think that takes like a level of courage, a courage that you have, that you were willing to call it out. And for so many who are kind of struggling on their path, that's sometimes it's the hardest part. Is just being able to actually say, ooh, that's something I need to pay attention to, versus let's get as far away from that as possible.
Totally. The avoidance and the
Right.
resistance and like all of that. Just, it's a
Mhm.
clue, right? It's almost a whisper.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's the work right here. This is it. Be grateful that you have an awareness about it now. Yeah. Oh my God, Jen, this was fun as always. As always, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank our listeners. I'm so excited to record episode 28 next week. And Jen, thank you. Just a reminder to all of our listeners, rate, review, download, share the podcast. We love the community that we are building through this podcast, this connectivity. And last but certainly not least, please, please, please remember that every single day is a great day to thrive and shine in HR. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.